My mama loved you so much, and she appreciated your love for her, and I'm sorry that she couldn't hang on until today.
There are places in this world that carry weight, not because of their architecture or their size, but because of what happened inside them, because of the stories sealed into their walls, the grief absorbed into their floorboards, and the silence that settles where laughter once lived. The farmhouse in Leaper's Fork, Tennessee, is one of those places. It sits quietly off a winding country road, surrounded by rolling hills and old oak trees, tucked away from the noise of Nashville like a secret kept for decades. From the outside, it looks like a dream, a peaceful retreat, exactly the kind of place a woman who spent 30 years under blinding stage lights would choose to call home. But what happened inside those walls on the morning of April 30th, 2022, transformed that dream into something no family should ever have to carry. Naomi Judd was found there by her daughter Ashley. She was gone before the sun went down. And in the weeks, months, and now years since that morning, devastating new details have continued to surface about that house, about what led up to that day, and about the environment Naomi was living in during the final chapter of her life. Some details come from court filings, others from family interviews, public records, and the quiet testimony of those who loved her. None of them are easy to hear, but all of them matter, because understanding where Naomi spent her last days helps us understand the full weight of what was lost and why her story deserves to be told with honesty, compassion, and care. Leaper's Fork is not a place most people have heard of. It is a small, unincorporated community in Williamson County, Tennessee, about 40 miles southwest of Nashville. The kind of place where people go when they want to disappear from the world without actually leaving it. Country music royalty has long been drawn to this area. The rolling farmland, the privacy, the sense that the rest of the world cannot find you here unless you want to be found. Naomi and her husband, Larry Strickland, had settled into their property there after years of living in the public eye, and by all accounts, it represented everything Naomi had worked for. Peace, quiet, land, a place to breathe. The property was expansive, with multiple acres of Tennessee countryside surrounding a large, comfortable home. It was decorated with the kind of warmth Naomi was known for. Personal touches everywhere. Photographs, meaningful objects, the kinds of things that tell you a woman with a rich inner life lived here. Friends who visited over the years described it as inviting and warm, a home that felt lived in and loved. Naomi had a deep appreciation for beauty and for the natural world, and that farmhouse reflected both. But here is what those same friends also began to quietly acknowledge after her passing. The very features that made that house feel like a sanctuary also made it isolating in ways that were dangerous for someone battling the kind of severe mental illness Naomi carried. The seclusion that offered her peace from the world also meant that when the darkness came, there was no noise to break it. No neighbor close enough to check in. No foot traffic to pull her attention outward. No accidental interruptions that sometimes, without anyone realizing it, can be the difference between a person making it through a bad hour and not making it at all. Mental health professionals who speak about environment and depression consistently point to isolation as one of the most significant risk factors for individuals with treatment-resistant depression and bipolar disorder. Not because solitude is inherently harmful, but because when the mind turns against itself, distance from other people removes the natural friction that keeps a person anchored to the present. Naomi had spoken in her own memoir, River of Time, about spending weeks without leaving her home, about days that blurred together in the kind of stillness that felt less like rest and more like disappearing. That house, as beautiful as it was, had become the container for some of the worst suffering of her life. In the weeks leading up to April 30th, 2022, people close to Naomi noticed that something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in ways that would have triggered immediate alarm, but in the quiet, subtle way that those who love someone with severe depression learn to track. Larry Strickland, her husband of more than 30 years, later described noticing a faraway quality in her eyes in those final weeks. A distance that didn't feel like tiredness or distraction, something that felt more fundamental than that. He has spoken with the kind of grief that comes not just from loss, but from the particular torment of having been present and still not been able to prevent what happened. That is a specific kind of pain that no amount of time fully erases. Ashley Judd, who maintained a close relationship with her mother in the years before her death, had been visiting regularly. She knew her mother's rhythms. She knew the difference between a hard day and a dangerous one, or at least she believed she did. In interviews she gave after her mother's passing, Ashley described those final weeks as a period where Naomi was struggling more visibly than usual, but where there were also still moments of connection, of warmth, of the woman she knew breaking through the darkness long enough to remind everyone that she was still there. What Ashley and others have described about the house during that period is important. The home had grown quieter. Naomi had been spending more time in her bedroom, which was located upstairs. She had been less engaged with the daily routines that had previously structured her days. The kitchen, which had always been a place of activity and warmth in that house, had grown still. Meals had become irregular. The normal patterns of domestic life that quietly tether us to the present had loosened their grip. There's something deeply telling about this detail. When someone with severe depression begins withdrawing from the physical spaces they once inhabited with intention and warmth, when the kitchen goes quiet and the bedroom becomes the whole world, it is one of the most significant warning signs that the illness is advancing. The house was reflecting what was happening inside Naomi. The rooms she had once moved through with energy and presence were becoming rooms she passed through like a ghost. On the morning of April 30th, 2022, Ashley arrived at the farmhouse. This was not unusual. She had been coming regularly, keeping close watch over her mother the way adult children do when they sense that something is wrong, even if they cannot name exactly what. When Ashley arrived that morning, she later described finding Naomi in a state that was recognizably different from her normal difficult days. She was unusually withdrawn. She moved through the house slowly and without her usual presence. There were moments that morning where Naomi paced the kitchen floor, where she said things out loud that spoke to how exhausted she was by the effort of continuing. She told her daughter that she did not want to be here anymore. That phrase, those words, carried a weight that Ashley understood even as she tried to hold steady in the face of them. They had navigated these waters before together, mother and daughter, and Ashley had learned to respond with presence rather than panic. She stayed close. She listened. She did what she had always done, which was show up and not leave. At one point, Naomi calmed somewhat. She and Ashley talked. There were moments of genuine connection, the kind that families with a long history of navigating pain together know how to find, even in the middle of crisis. Naomi asked her daughter to stay with her, and Ashley did. They sat together in the house that had held so many seasons of their complicated, loving, painful, and ultimately unbreakable relationship. Then Ashley stepped away, just briefly. Someone came to the door, a close family friend, and Ashley moved upstairs to let her mother know. She was gone for only a few minutes. The distance was small. The time was short. But in those minutes inside that bedroom in that quiet house in Leapers Fork, Tennessee, Naomi Judd took her own life. Among the most difficult details to discuss surrounding the circumstances of Naomi's death is the matter of the firearm. It has been publicly confirmed that Naomi died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. What this detail demands is not sensationalism, but honest conversation about something that mental health advocates, medical professionals, and suicide prevention researchers have been trying to communicate to the public for decades. Access to lethal means matters enormously in cases of mental health crisis. The research on this point is consistent and significant. When individuals in acute psychiatric crisis do not have immediate access to highly lethal methods, the likelihood of surviving that crisis increases substantially. This is not because the underlying illness goes away. It is because crises, even severe ones, are often time-limited. They peak and they pass. And if a person can be kept safe through the peak of that crisis, many of them go on to live and to find periods of stability and even meaning on the other side. Naomi had been living with her illness for decades. She had been hospitalized. She had undergone extensive treatment. The people who loved her were aware of her struggles. The presence of a firearm in that home, accessible during a moment of acute crisis, is a detail that sits painfully in the middle of everything that happened that morning. It is not a detail meant to assign blame to anyone. It is a detail that deserves to be part of the larger conversation about how we protect people we love when they're living with the kinds of illnesses Naomi lived with, and how homes themselves can be made safer during those periods. Mental health organizations consistently advocate for what is called means restriction as one of the most effective components of a suicide prevention plan. This means working with families to temporarily remove or secure access to firearms and other lethal means during periods of elevated risk. It is a conversation that is hard to have, especially in communities and regions where firearms are a normal and valued part of daily life. But it is a conversation that saves lives, and Naomi's story puts that conversation directly in front of us. When a call went out from that farmhouse on April 30th, 2022, and emergency responders arrived at the property in Leapers Fork, the scene they encountered became part of the public record in ways the Judd family had not anticipated and could not have prepared for. Police responded as they do in any case involving sudden, unexpected death. They documented everything. They recorded conversations. They logged observations. Officers were doing exactly what their training and the law required of them. But what that meant in practical terms was that the most private, devastating, intimate moments of Ashley Judd's life, the moments she spent on the floor of that house with her mother, were captured and filed as public record under Tennessee law. When Ashley learned that those recordings could be accessed by members of the media and the general public, the impact on her was severe and immediate. She has described experiencing acute trauma response upon learning this. The house where her mother had died was already a place of unbearable grief. Now the moments she had spent inside it on that morning were being treated as information rather than as the sacred, shattering human experience they actually were. The family filed legal action to attempt to block the release of those recordings and photographs taken at the scene. It was a fight fought inside the legal framework of Tennessee's public record statutes, which are broad and do not easily accommodate requests for privacy protection, even in cases of profound human tragedy. The family argued that compassion and human dignity demanded that those moments be protected. The legal system weighed that against questions of transparency and public access. The lawsuit was ultimately dismissed in September of 2022 after certain media organizations withdrew their requests for specific materials. But the experience left another layer of damage on a family already fractured by impossible grief. There's a tendency, when something devastating happens in a place, to focus on the physical location as though it holds the answer to why. People drive past houses where tragedies occurred. They look at photographs. They try to see in architecture or the landscape some clue about how things went wrong. But houses do not cause suffering. They simply hold it. The farmhouse in Leapers Fork did not create Naomi Judd's illness. It did not create the decades of treatment-resistant depression, the panic disorder, the bipolar disorder that she had battled since the late 1990s. Those battles preceded that house by years and were fought across many different addresses in many different seasons of her life. What that house represents now is something more complicated than a crime scene or a site of tragedy. It represents the intersection of a very private struggle with a very public life. It represents the gap between what we can see from the outside and what is actually happening inside. Naomi Judd spent years presenting a version of herself to the world that was polished and powerful